Okay, we are now recording, and I'm going to welcome you again. So, thanks again for everyone for joining us today. I'm Jennifer Schack. I'm the Director of Research at Resolution Systems Institute. And for those of you who don't know us, RSI is a nonprofit with a mission to strengthen access to justice by enhancing court alternative dispute resolution systems. And we do this by conducting evaluations, doing research, like the research we will be presenting on today, and providing technical assistance primarily to courts. Um, Today it's going to be a lot like our last webinar. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of background. I'm not going to be quite as long since most of you probably have joined us um, for the last one. And then Stephen Sullivan, our researcher, will present. And just like our last webinar, we're going to have some quizzes with our research associate, Jasmine Henry, playing the host and providing insights. If you have any questions, please put them in chat, and then after each quiz, we will answer a few questions before going forward. Very quickly, why are we putting on these webinars? We're putting them on because we've seen how communications, like documents, websites, videos, that meet self-represented litigants where they are can make them more confident and eager to navigate an unfamiliar process. And because we have seen just how hard it is to do, and felt it too. And these webinars are a product of focus group research and usability testing that we did to uncover barriers to ODR use and to determine what SRLs need in order to understand and use a process that is unfamiliar to them. If you want to know more about that research, you can go to our website, odr.aboutrsi.org. But this webinar is going to be about trust and technology, as you know, and everyone knows about the problems that technological barriers can cause. But fewer, I think, really think about the need for trust and how trust is related to program use. What trust really is what gets parties to use a process that they're not familiar with. They need to know that this process is there to benefit them. It's not to benefit the court or somebody else solely, but it's also there to benefit them. They need to understand it well, to know how to use it, to know what the rules are. And what I mean by rules, I'm really talking about sort of the parameters within which the process works, such as, is it confidential or isn't it confidential? And they need to know that these rules apply to everyone across the board equally. They also need to feel that if they were to use this process, that they would actually get a good outcome from it, or they have a good probability of doing so. So that, if they're going to use online dispute resolution, are they going to, get that resolution that they want? And then they also, if they decide to go ahead and start using the process, what they see when they're there needs to be what they thought it was going to be when they learned about it. So if they, for example, they get onto text-based online dispute resolution and they thought it was going to be a video mediation, they might end up leaving the process without using it. If they thought mediation was going to be arbitration for some reason, they might not engage in mediation. And so we need to make sure that what we communicate is easy enough for them to understand and thorough enough that they know what they're getting. And all of this really goes down to communication. It's really essential that we communicate well in order to get them to believe those four things, that it benefits them, they understand it fully, that if they use it, it's going to help them, and that what they get is what they thought they were going to get. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen.
Well, thank you, Jen. So as Jen mentioned, my name is Stephen. I'm a researcher at RSI, and it's really great to be with everyone for our second webinar. So to start things off, I would actually love to hear more about all of you, whether you're joining us for the first time or you were here for the last webinar. So if you could, in the chat, please introduce yourself, the organization or court that you're calling in from, and then one thing you're hoping to learn today. And while everyone does that, I'm going to go over what you can expect from our webinar. So during the webinar so far, we've been discussing some of the common communication barriers that self-represented litigants face. So as you all know, SRLs are a significant portion of those who must go through the court system and do so with limited legal knowledge. We're also discussing this in the context of, a significant portion of adults in the U.S. can't read proficiently, and the latest data suggests that overall literacy has continued to decrease. So last time, as Jen mentioned, we focused on issues related to comprehension and emotions. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off and discuss um, technology and trust. We'll also be holding a series of workshops soon where you can kind of put what you've learned from our webinars into practice, and Jen will touch on those a bit more later. As we go through the presentation today, we're also going to refer to our open models to exemplify some of the barriers in communication materials and how to address them. So throughout the webinar, I'll turn it over to Jazz, who's going to ask our quiz questions. And as Jen mentioned, if at any point you have a question about something you've seen on the screen or anything else that comes to mind, feel free to toss them in the chat. And after each quiz question, we'll kind of take stock of the questions that have accumulated and go over them as best we can. So with that, let's see, it looks like we have folks calling in from Evanston. Someone writes, hoping for suggestions for improving my mediation skills. Cool. So I think the main focus will be on communication, but hopefully by communicating better through the kind of insights that we're providing, that will also help your practice in other ways too. Um, we have someone calling in from Illinois. We've studied plain language, white space, etc., and how to communicate. Excited for more tools in our toolbox to help us communicate as a court and through our ADR programs. Awesome. Thank you. I'm glad that it's been helpful so far and excited to build on it. Someone else writes, I'm a retired judge who's been doing arbitration and mediation. I always want to learn new skills. Awesome. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Looks like we have folks calling in from Oregon, from Minnesota, hoping to learn about communication barriers. Someone else mentioning, oh, they learned about it through Cyber Week. I'm glad that you're joining us. Interested to learn about best practices for effective communications. Great. Thank you all so much. Um, so to kick things off, I'm going to turn it over to Jazz, who's going to go over our first quiz question.
Thanks, Stephen. And again, my name's Jasmine. I'm the research associate at RSI. So our first quiz question, I'll go ahead and launch. So we are going to be answering the question of what reading level is recommended for communications intended for self-represented litigants. And your options are 5th grade, 8th grade, 12th grade, and college. Looks like we have about 72% of us have selected, so we'll give a couple more seconds to complete that. Really no wrong answer, because whatever answer you select, we're going to learn together about what the right answer is. So, all right, just a couple more seconds if y'all want to get any last answers in. And then I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and let y'all see what everyone else has selected as well. So I'll share the results and show you guys the correct answer, which is the most selected answer here, the first answer. So communications intended for SRLs should be written at or below a 5th grade reading level. About 20% of US adults read at or below a 5th grade reading level. Most US adults read at or below the 8th or 9th grade level. So the second selected answer here, second most selected answer here of 8th grade, also sort of gets at that, where the majority of the US adults are reading, but enable for you to ensure the really, really wide understanding and get that 20% of adults reading at the 5th grade level, you want to try and read at that level. So You can test the readability of your materials using an online calculator. There's a lot of different tests. You can use the Flesch-Kincaid test, the Fry formula, or the SMOG formula. At RSI, we routinely utilize an online Flesch-Kincaid calculator. All right, thank you guys. So I'll go ahead and pass it back to Stephen to continue on.
Oh, thank you, Jazz. So let's start digging in. So I'm curious to hear from you all. What do you think makes a communication material seem untrustworthy? So one of the biggest challenges facing the court system, as many other public institutions and services, is diminished trust. So it's important to think about how you can increase your users' trust in your materials, because if they don't trust your materials, they're not going to use them. So for SRLs, their first encounter with your program might be with the materials they receive. And so that's really important that they perceive your materials as trustworthy from the start. And something we touched on last time too is to remember that trust is a process, and it's one that you can establish and foster with effective communication materials. So let's talk about what might make a communication material seem untrustworthy. So if you could take a look at this notice here on the right. So you received this notice in the mail about an ODR program. Any guesses about what could make this seem untrustworthy? And feel free to put your answers into the chat. Any initial guesses? I'll give a couple more moments just in case folks are typing. Let's see. Someone says no court or county seal. Someone else doesn't say who it's from. Someone asked the question, how is the notice received online? So we made this notice to be received through the mail. No phone number to call. Okay. Someone else, I want to see more ways to contact the provider beyond email or websites. Okay, great. These are really, really great responses. So let's talk about what we found. So um, we we asked folks through our open project what makes notices seem untrustworthy, and we found that our focus group participants were skeptical of court documents generally, and especially skeptical of online ADR websites, such as like existing ODR websites. Our participants were hyper aware of the possibility that they could receive and fall for scam documents. Some of them even shared like just personal experiences with fraud schemes or family members who had experienced that. And upon reviewing mailed court documents, we found that most participants wanted to call someone from the court to confirm whether the documents they received and the program that's being described were real and trustworthy. So the person who said phone number, absolutely. Court seal, which also came up. So one of the important visual signs is the presence of a court seal. Without it, participants felt that the ODR website is untrustworthy. Um, and we also sent them through a website so that they're clicking on the button to register for ODR from the court's website, which can also signal that the platform is legitimate. Contact information, which also came up in the comments. So people in our focus groups looked for contact information. And so a major reason to include a phone number is that our participants said that they would be hesitant to register and they would need to call someone just to make sure that the materials are legitimate. One other that might not be immediately apparent is a mismatch. So part of the reason that some users had a hard time deciphering and deciding whether to trust a court notice is because the parties to the court on the case might not match the parties in the real life conflict. So for example, like a small claims case where a debt sold to a third party, or a landlord-tenant case where the tenant doesn't recognize the property company. So these are things to think about in addition to what we've already laid out. And why are these so important? So if participants feel skeptical, they might hesitate to proceed. They might be just wait for further confirmation, which could delay the process, or they could just abandon it altogether, which is ultimately what we want to avoid. So it's that. Let's turn it over to Jazz for another question.
thanks, Stephen. So the second question is going to be, which is the best way to illustrate instructions in court documents? So do you want a full color photograph with people in it? Do you want complex infographics with a lot of details? Do you want simple illustrations placed next to related text, or you want to avoid visuals? Go ahead and give you guys a couple of seconds to answer this. Looks like almost everyone who answered last time has answered again. Okay, great. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share with you guys the results. So you guys did great. You guys did awesome. You guys might have come to our open launch party where we had somewhat of a related question about this, but as a lot of you guys got right, the third answer here is correct. The best way to illustrate instructions in court documents is going to be with simple illustrations placed next to that related text. So any visuals used in communication materials sent to SRLs should be used to highlight major concepts and draw the reader's attention to them. They shouldn't be used just sort of extraneously, and they shouldn't contain additional visual details that are not important to the core of what you're trying to communicate. Because that additional sort of excessive features, those can become distractions that pull your user's focus from the content that you're trying to highlight. So Stephen showed you guys that notice that we had kind of worked up. That wasn't the best example of a notice for SRLs. And we highlighted a lot of really maybe not great things in the notice. And one thing we didn't quite talk about that I wanted to bring to y'all's attention is the photograph that we had included in that notice was sort of a vague photograph, for lack of a better term. And it kind of had, looks like maybe Stephen's trying to go back a little bit too. Thank you, Stephen. So you see it has a person in it. It has them on the computer. It has a phone in front of them. So it has details that might seem relevant to online dispute resolution, sort of when you're thinking at the beginning of it, but it doesn't have any real like specific content that is related to ODR, and it might draw your users' attention from what is actually really, really important in this notice. So just being aware that we're not just using visuals to make stuff pretty, we're using it to really enhance our users' understanding. Thank you so much, Stephen, and I will pass it back to you at that.
Great. Thank you, Jazz. So let's dig into trust a bit more. What's important to note, so thus far we've been mostly talking about legitimacy, but there's actually much more to the picture than that when we're talking about trust. So comprehensibility is also a key part of building trust. So the more that SRLs understand the information that you're providing, the more likely they will be to trust it and also know what to do, which is really important. So last webinar, we discussed how scaffolding is an effective strategy to enhance the comprehensibility of your materials. So I'd like to do just a very quick review for maybe folks who didn't join us last time. But I'd also encourage you to review that recording for a fuller discussion of scaffolding. So scaffolding is an educational strategy, and it's used to break down large and complex amounts of information or instruction into digestible chunks. So each step builds on the former one. It provides a structure for people to follow, and in the process builds their confidence. So in our open communication models, for example, the users move from the notice to our ODR website, to our informational video, to the self-help guide, and then finally to the registration process, where each step kind of builds on the previous. And this allows them to kind of learn gradually, as opposed to presenting a bunch of information at once and feeling overwhelmed. So part of why we're talking about this is that scaffolding is an effective way to address some of the tech barriers that SRLs commonly face. Research has continued to demonstrate that people struggle with digital literacy. And of course, there are different dimensions to what digital literacy means in practice. So that is whether and how people can use available technology tools to find information, to complete tasks, and to communicate. So during our open project, we heard from folks about their widespread fears about providing their information, a sense of overwhelm about the amount of information that they're provided by courts, and also just a general lack of confidence in their ability to navigate online court platforms without assistance. And these barriers are compounded again by just the general language and communication trends that we discussed earlier about decreasing literacy rates. Part of addressing tech barriers is also making navigation as easy as possible for SRLs who are not technologically savvy. And like we discussed last time, making these changes benefits everyone. So navigation here, when we discuss that, is there's kind of two components to it. There's formatting and there's workflow. So when materials are well designed, which is something we discussed previously, they're more approachable. Um, and a clear workflow also helps to guide participants through the process as simple a manner as possible. And we found through our usability testing that participants felt much more confident in their ability to navigate a process, such as learning about and signing up for ODR, if they're provided a clear workflow. So the information should be presented using plain language, should be formatted effectively, and this, for example, last time we discussed using bullet points, white space, effective headers. This time we're going to go over what simplifying navigation means by kind of revising some of the communication materials that we created. So before we jump into that, I'll turn it back over to Jazz for another quiz question.
Okay, great. So our third quiz question is going to ask which of the following tools helps users move from written to online materials. So do you want to divide the content into smaller parts that builds on each other? Do you want to use repetition and encourage reflection? Do you want to provide checklists and step-by-step instructions, or do you want to use all of these tools listed? We'll give you just about a minute to answer this question. Again, really no wrong answer. All right, y'all, getting your last answers in before I end the poll. This one's a little bit longer with the answers, so giving us a couple extra seconds. Go ahead and end it now and share the results with you guys. So the last answer here is correct. All of the tools listed help users move from written to online materials. So this question and answer is all about that scaffolding that Stephen was just talking about, and which we discussed last webinar as well. So it's important not to only think about your user's experience with each individual communication material, but also to think about how the materials can build off of each other. And notice I say that the materials build on each other. They're not all just copies of each other, like the same material in a different format. So for example, you might have a video that explains the ODR process, and that video leads them to a website that allows them to craft an initial offer. So it's not maybe explicitly repeating what was said in the video, and the video doesn't talk about crafting an initial offer, but instead sort of breaking up that information into digestible chunks and slotting it into the communication method that works best for that material is really, really helpful. So we have examples of this on our microsite at which is the odr.aboutrsi.org that Sandy has already sent in the chat. And you can see our example video that we made, which explains the ODR process like I was just talking about. And then we also have an example website where the parties can craft offers. We have an example sort of printed notice, and you can see how we reference certain information throughout the different materials, but also, you know, certain information is included only in the video or only on the website. And so that scaffolding is really effective. You do, like I said, you just sort of want to repeat some information throughout the different materials in different ways to really help your user build up the knowledge and feel comfortable moving through your materials. Another way to do this is as you have your user move through the materials, you can use reflective tools like mini checkpoints or quizzes to encourage your users to really reflect on the information and integrate it into their knowledge base before they move on to the next topic or the next material. So the checklist and step-by-step instructions, they also help because when you give people that sort of overall roadmap and they understand that they're going to need to move from a written notice to a video to a website, that can be really helpful because people like knowing where they're going to be going, what they're going to be doing. So providing them with the roadmap makes it less likely that they'll kind of get stuck or stall out on an early step because they can see the entire process laid out in a really hopefully basic way. And then they can know the path they have to take to move through your program. And with that, I'll go ahead and pass it back to Stephen.
Thank you, Jazz. And yeah, to touch on something Jazz was just discussing, part of it also relates back to a point that Jen made in the opening about setting expectations. And when you describe what users should expect, presenting it can also be a way to build trust and making sure that those are consistent. So let's talk about simplifying navigation. So we've already kind of go over scaffolding and why that's important, but what does it actually look like to move from one material to another and to do so effectively? So we're going to start with the notice, which in our model is the first material that they receive. So we designed our model to provide basic information about ODR and how users can find out more and also register. To do so, they have to navigate to the ODR website. So that's our main goal right here, is to make that navigation as easy as possible for them. So you'll see here is a section of a paper notice that they would receive. And there are a few issues with it. So first, it has poorly formatted text, as we've kind of been already going over. What we discussed last time, effective formatting means using ample white space and bullet points and question headers, and those are all things that are lacking currently. The notice does have a QR code, which is good, but it's not labeled. And generally, designers recommend labeling your QR code so that users know exactly where it's leading them and what to expect when they scan it. This was something we also had confirmed to us in our usability testing of our models. So we tested an earlier version of a notice, kind of like this one, that didn't have a label. And a few testers thought it led them to the video that was mentioned in the notice and not to the website, which is where it actually led and what we intended. So just getting ahead of that issue can really help. The other main issue with this notice is that it doesn't establish a clear workflow. So it describes the ODR website, but it doesn't provide clear steps for the user to follow. So let's take a look at an updated and improved version of this notice. So here's a new section of an updated notice. So remember the two parts of the navigation that I mentioned earlier, workflow and formatting. So this new version has well-formatted text. It uses the design principles we encouraged. The QR code is labeled. As you'll see there, scan this QR code to go to odr.homecountycourt.gov. Testers appreciated how easy it was to scan the QR code, and they trusted that it sent them to the correct place. We heard from folks who felt they would not feel totally comfortable typing a URL and kind of risk making a mistake and going to the wrong website. So that simplifies that. And the new notice also establishes a clearer workflow. So this is a different part of the updated notice. And you'll see here that this additional text kind of lays out what the user should do step by step. So there's 4 simple steps. The image here is related to what's described in the text and is useful. It points to where the Start ODR button is. That's described in step 2. And it provides just a very simple workflow for the users to use. We designed our open communication models with kind of one major guiding principle, which is mobile first design. By mobile first, I don't just mean mobile friendly, but built with the assumption that most users will access online materials using their smartphones. So, for example, in research that Jen and Donna Shatowski conducted of an ODR program in Michigan, they found that 71% of parties accessed ODR using a mobile phone rather than a PC, and only about 7.7% used a computer. During our usability tests for the Open project, we presented users with the option of using a smartphone or a laptop, and most definitely identified smartphones as the devices that they primarily use for online activities. So what does this mean for communication materials? It means using PDFs sparingly because those are difficult to read on mobile phones. It also means building materials meant to be viewed on phones. So optimizing web pages for touch interfaces, ensuring that videos can be played on poor connections, so not like super high quality or super high resolution, which could slow it down. And these are also kind of aspects that we evaluated through usability testing. So can people easily access and find and hit the buttons that we designed? Are they able to watch the video and with full attention? Are they able to read and understand the text that's across different pages? And so I'm more than happy to answer any questions you might have about usability testing. So feel free to ask about that in the chat or any other questions you might have so far. With that, I'll turn it to Jazz for one more quiz question.
Even so, let's go ahead and launch our last quiz question, which is about mobile first formatting. So what tools should you be using for mobile first formatting? You can put all of the links in one page so that the users can easily click around and look at everything. You could fill both sides of the page with text so that users can take in as much information as possible. You can keep all of the important information in a couple of PDFs so that it's all in one place and users can download them. You can have all of your videos autoplay so that the users are more likely to watch them. And then we also have as options all of the above and none of the above. And again, this one's a little bit longer, so I'll give you guys a little bit longer than a minute to fill out your answers. It looks like most of us have completed it. So if you haven't and you want to submit, I'll give you a couple more seconds before I close the poll. All right, or quiz, I should say. All right, so again, a lot of y'all gravitated towards the correct answer for this quiz, which is the last answer. Unfortunately, none of the tools listed are particularly helpful for mobile first formatting. So the first tool, you don't want to put all of the links on one page because that can lead to something called link surfing, where your users jump around from link to link to link, and they don't really land anywhere and they don't absorb any of the information. So we want to avoid that, and we can help avoid that by not grouping a bunch of links together. And then also when we use links, we want to make sure that the link names are really explicit and meaningful. We're not just using a bunch of click here's or read more, because that doesn't really describe where you're going to take your reader. And as Stephen and I have mentioned a couple times, your reader, as many of us, they kind of want to know where they're going in your process. So the second option here, you also don't want to fill your entire page with text. Research shows that people with low digital literacy tend to scan just one side of the page, either left or right. A lot of times they'll read in a capital F shaped reading pattern. So it's really helpful to keep your important information on one side of the page, probably the left side, and leave a good amount of the right side open, which adds white space and increases that readability. If you want to fill that right space somewhat, you can add basic illustrations or other really helpful organizational tools potentially. So the third option here, you also do not want to keep all of your important information in a couple of PDFs. As Stephen mentioned, not everyone can view PDFs on their phone or even their computers. Even if they can view them, they might not be able to download them or store them or revisit them. It also typically involves an extra link that takes them away from your main website. So it's really much better to embed the important information into your website and make it accessible to your users in that way. There are, of course, situations where PDFs can be helpful and useful to put information in, like if you want to create a document that your users can print, whether it's sort of a user guide or a one-pager. Just make sure that there's no important information that's contained only in that PDF. You just have to have that important information also accessible in your web page. And then you also, the last option here, you do not want to have any of your videos autoplay. Stephen touched on having your videos be a little bit lower quality, and this sort of feeds into that same vein because if your video is auto playing on someone's phone and they don't have a lot of connection or bandwidth to load the rest of your website, then that could cause them to decide that they're not going to try to continue to load your website and exit out. So you want to just have that video pause when they go on your website, and so that your user can decide when to play that video. And then, yeah, that's about it. I think so. Yeah. And so the last thing I guess I would say about the video is that because you're going to have the video pause when the users come onto your website, you may want to be more particular with what cover photo you choose for the videos that you're hosting. The cover photo doesn't have to be what the video is going to show when it starts playing, so you can put something that's more descriptive there if you wanted to. And that is all I have for the quizzes today. So thank you guys for learning with me, and I'll pass y'all back to Stephen.
Oh, thank you, Jazz. Okay, so let's revise one more communication material. So here we're going to focus on an ADR program webpage, but these are principles that you can apply elsewhere. It's not particular to this. So we're going to start with the website for our own eviction mediation program, which is not as optimized as it could be. So you'll see here on the right, here's a section of the website. The webpage has too much text. I think that's pretty apparent kind of at first glance. It's just a lot of text, not particularly well formatted. But also you might notice the diagram at the bottom, which could be useful on desktop, but is definitely not suitable for viewing on mobile devices. The text would just be simply too small to read. And there's also opportunity to establish a clearer workflow here, kind of much like the notice that we were looking at previously. So let's take a look at an updated material. So this won't be the exact same website, but it'll be taken from our open materials about an ODR program, but you can see some of the ways that it's more effective. So this is a section of our open webpage model, which is mobile first in its design. You can see that unlike the previous webpage, this one has well-formatted text, clearer workflow, has more minimal and more intentional links. And you'll see that we also included a question header, which is something we discussed last time. So how should I prepare for ODR? And then two options, a guide for plaintiffs and a guide for defendants. And something that's also important that we talked about last time was that we implemented design in plain language principles that we discussed. So defining what plaintiff and defendant means for those unfamiliar. So in bigger text, we have if you are the person who has filed the lawsuit, or for the defendant's button, if you are the person being sued. So all you can see how kind of all of the fixes that we've been discussing in these webinars so far really come together here. And I would encourage you to check out our open models to see how we implement these principles in other contexts, including like our self-help guide, which also uses the same principles. So what I've hoped that you've taken from these examples is that by simplifying the process of navigating your communication materials, you can build trust with your users. When communication materials are easy to understand and to navigate, participants are more likely to feel confident in their abilities and more trusting of the programs that you're offering to them, and also more at ease about their situation. And these are all outcomes that we found through usability testing. So throughout our testing sessions, testers acknowledged that, putting themselves in the shoes of someone who would receive these materials, that they would obviously be stressed being sued, but they'd feel a bit more at ease and more confident and increasingly confident with our materials because they were easy to understand through the scaffolding, through the clear workflow, through design principles like plain language, mobile first formatting. And this was also despite some of the explicit tech barriers and security concerns that they expressed to us. Many of them shared, again, like they knew family members who had fallen victim to scams. They were very skeptical and hesitant and unconfident in their abilities. But by doing these things, by simplifying navigation, you can make it much more easier for SRLs to feel that they know what to do and also how to do it. So as we're winding things down, I'd like to share a link to our open resources. Much of what we discussed today and even more, including our court communication guide, the videos that we've been discussing can be found at odr.aboutrsi.org. You can also reach out to us at research@aboutrsi.org. Yeah, I'll turn it over to Jen now, who can go over what you all can expect next. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. Before I do that, does anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I'd also want to talk about something that we didn't touch upon yet. And it's in part because we didn't ask questions about this during our usability testing. And so it's mainly impressions that we got at the time. And that is that when we designed our materials, we included illustrations. We made it really easy for them to understand. And it wasn't just that they understood the materials, but they felt that the materials were really made for them, that it wasn't your usual court website or your document that just looks like a court document, that it really did make it seem like we were talking to them and not at them. I was afraid, due to the legitimacy issues that the focus group had, I was afraid that if we took them to a website that had illustrations on it, that was supposed to be the court website, that they would think that that was not a real court website because it wasn't professional enough, or it didn't seem like a court website. We got a very different response, which was, this is great. We love this. Our video is all illustrated. They love that video. So I think there is something to creating the materials that fit with the self-represented litigants rather than with sort of a court atmosphere. There's a quote that I just love that I say almost every time I talk about the Open Project, which is that during our usability testing at intervals, we would say, well, how would you feel now if you were Jane Roe, who they were supposed to be? They were supposed to be Jane Roe. How would Jane Roe feel now? And towards the end, one of our testers said, I wouldn't feel alone anymore. And that was huge. I mean, that just, like, to me, that meant that they were feeling like they were being included, and the court was taking their hand. They felt like they were being brought along. So all of it to say that I think, as you create materials, think about it through the eyes of an SRL and not through the eyes of the court. So with that, it doesn't look like I've got any questions coming in. So I will wrap this up by saying, thank you again for joining us today. And I hope you have taken away some good insights and tips for your own communications. And feel free, if you have any questions, to reach out to us at research@aboutrsi.org. You can see our email address on the screen. And if you would like more guidance on your communications, we are having a series of workshops starting in early 2026 that will allow you to work with us in small groups to create or improve your public-facing documents, your website, and/or your video, and to create a workflow that makes sense to SRLs and improves their understanding and confidence. We will be providing more information about those in the future. Just look out for emails from us if you have signed up for them. And also, please do fill out the survey as you exit. This time we actually do have a survey. We really do want to hear from you about what we can improve and what we've done well. So again, thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to stop recording.